today's market, things are changing drastically within the parts operations. Used to be said that parts inventory management wasn't rocket science. Well, over the next 15-20 minutes, I'm going to cover this subject in detail on how manufacturer replenishment programs are working within dealerships this day and age and what it really means to you as a parts manager. In other words, helping to educate you as to what your manufacturer is doing will go a long way in helping you understand that. First, we start with the stock replenishment programs and how the industry is changing and changing rapidly within the last couple of years. When you look at this slide and you look at the left-hand side, you see the manufacturer programs that have been around for a while. General Motors, of course, introduced automatic stock replenishment with RIM. Chrysler quickly followed behind a couple of years later with Aero, automatic replenishment ordering. And then there's PartsEye. PartsEye, through SmartCo, has manufacturers Subaru, Kia, Nissan, and Isuzu, soon to be Mazda and Hyundai. And for those of you that might be listening to this as a Nissan store, Nissan is moving into their own version, what they call Nissan 2.0 and Infinity 2.0, which has their own stock replenishment, which is bringing it back into the manufacturer. Again, Mazda and Hyundai getting ready to launch PartsEye in this calendar year, 2019. Then you have Mercedes-Benz with StockPro, BMW with SRD, all of these acronyms meaning some sort of stock replenishment program. Porsche with ASR, and Land Rover and Jaguar just recently trying to make their own version of RIM. Then when you look to the right side of the program, you can see that there are traditional programs, with the exception of about 4 manufacturers. Even though they're traditional programs, they still have some type of control, such as Ford. Ford, with their control settings, they have their own phase-in, phase-out criteria and day supply that they want you to use for both OE and motorcraft. But yet they're going to a new RIM program in 2020 called Rapid. Nobody really knows what that is yet, but it's coming. Again, Hyundai had Smart Stock and still is, but soon to go to PartsEye. And then Mazda was much like Ford, where they had a top retail list of 500 parts that you needed to carry at least 90% to remain compliant and get incentives. Volkswagen and Audi, they use a program called SSA, and in the SSA, they make suggested stocking suggestions, and the dealer has to carry at least 80% of that list, with absolutely no guarantee, by the way, but it helps the incentives and the buyback dollar amounts. I've already talked about Nissan, but then Toyota and Honda, Acura, Mitsubishi, and Suzuki, at least at this particular point, they have no stock replenishment program. So you can see there's very few manufacturers left that aren't trying to some degree to control your inventory. So when you look at this and you think, are these manufacturer programs being successful? Are they working? One of the things you really have to look at is how is inventory performance and obsolescence being affected by these manufacturer programs? But let's just take a look at it by the numbers. So what we have here is we have a bunch of dealers put together, the manufacturers. When you look at these numbers, we took all of our Chrysler stores, our Ford, Volkswagen, Honda, the manufacturers represented here, we took all of them and averaged out their inventory. So this isn't just one specific dealership. This is a group of dealerships which gave us enough to really look at their obsolete ranking average. One of the things as you look at the slide is that you'll notice that we have treated Chrysler and GM and PartsEye dealerships as 2 completely different inventories. what's guaranteed and what's not guaranteed. So for instance, when you look at a Chrysler dealership, 20.45% of their inventory, not guaranteed, this is the non-guaranteed portion of their inventory, is obsolete. With General Motors, non-rim parts, 18.49% of their inventory is obsolete. When you look to the very bottom of it, you'll notice that GM rim obsolescence is 2.69%. I want to preface this a little bit because you got to understand that GM dealers, even on guaranteed parts, have to keep the part for 16 months. So that's why it's a little high on that end. But now go to Chrysler Aero, who's at the very top of the obsolescence list based on percentage for non-Aero guaranteed parts, and that they're at the very bottom of the list because if it's guaranteed, you get to send it back at 12 months. So it's only obvious that these guaranteed parts would have the lowest percentage. What's ironic is you look through this, you look at Ford, who has no return program whatsoever. Under their program, where the dealers still control and do their own stock orders based on certain criteria, they still have 9.15% of their inventory is obsolete. They have to use incentive dollars, their IMA, inventory management allowance percentage. If you don't use that to purge inventory, there is no return program with Ford, with the exception of a 60-day buyback, 4% of their net purchases from the prior month. With Volkswagen, under their SSA program, where they have to carry 80% of the parts, you notice Volkswagen is still at 8.4%. But now when you get to Honda and Toyota, ironically, two manufacturers who have no control program whatsoever, Honda's average dealer, 4.64% in obsolescence, Toyota, 2.09%. What this slide really represents is the fact that these manufacturer programs are manufacturer driven and driven to help their inventory, not the dealer's inventory. One of the things I want to mention is manufacturers get together every couple of years, their supply chain managers who head up the depots, and they compare numbers on obsolescence. And one of the things that has happened over the last few years is obsolescence has gone up 7% at the dealership level. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if over the last 5 years you've seen obsolescence increase 7% at the dealerships, that these programs are affecting the dealership's pocketbook. And in some instances, with a couple of these programs that we've seen, inventory performance percentages are down at the dealership level with very little opportunity to get rid of obsolescence. They get rid of return allowance in the name of, we're guaranteeing everything that sells. And if this doesn't show that to you, I don't think anything ever will. But this is why obsolescence at the dealership level is up over 7% in the last 5 years. So one of the things you want to think back on, and this is where I'm going with this small education video or presentation, is thinking back up until even to date, in some instances, it still means the same thing. One of the things we've been able to count on for years from our manufacturers is the 40% profit margin rule. In short, when you think of a 40% profit margin rule, when we look at our parts manufacturers' master tapes, the pricing that comes out, the difference between cost and list was a 40% gross profit margin, or to equate that into simple mathematic terms, cost plus 67. For decades, we could count on this profit calculation. It literally held a lot of weight as far as our pricing, our discounts for wholesale, retail, matrix, everything. Well, that is starting to change. And what I wanted to do was just take a sampling of several different manufacturers and show you what I'm getting at. First off, we took Ford. And what we did here is we took some Ford dealerships, averaged it out, calculated this, and we wanted to see if the 40% profit margin still held true. What we found out with Ford was that not 99% of the parts had a 40% profit margin rule, but only 55%. Looking at the slide in the percent by parts, 55% of the parts were at a 40% gross profit margin. Now, 34% had a higher than 40% profit margin. One of the things we discovered with Ford, and this has been going on for a long time, is that in many instances, Motorcraft had a higher profit margin than that cost plus 40 rule. So the 34% of the part number population that had a higher gross profit margin were parts that were Motorcraft. And in some instances, we've had Ford dealers who have implemented a cost plus escalator. And in a cost plus escalator, when they went to sell a Motorcraft part, their escalator actually was a lower price than suggested list. Hence the Motorcraft percentages being pretty high. And if you look at the gross profit percentage on that 34%, in the GP percent field, you see the average yield, in other words, the average list price difference, had a 51.48% gross profit margin, 11% above the traditional 40% gross profit margin. But here's the kicker. This is the thing you want to look at. This is the critical part. If you notice, one of the things we did when we captured this information is we looked at cost list and the year sale, running 12-month sales. That's represented in the YRSL field. You'll notice that only 11% of the Ford part number population, 11%, was under 40%, the difference between cost and list. But yet when you went to the sales, it represented a whopping 52.29% of the overall sales. In other words, 11% of their part number population is doing 52% of their sales. So when you think of your gross profit on customer pay and matrixing and whatnot, traditionally what we've seen is Ford dealers tend to have the lowest customer pay gross profit. They're at the bottom of the spectrum compared to many other manufacturers. Now, the next one showed much more of a traditional type of pricing scenario that we would have expected, and this is Chrysler. Chrysler, you can see 96.65% of their part number population and 96.41% of their parts percent by year sale are actually right where you think they should be. In fact, one thing with Chrysler, you can see that only 2.43% of their part number population, which gave a yield of 25%, was under the 40% margin. The key here with this is to remember, and this has been this way with Chrysler for years, is those parts under 40% are basically accessories, and accessories have always had about a 28% gross profit margin, or what we would equivalent out to in simple math, cost plus 40. But you can see here, at least with Chrysler, here's one manufacturer you can almost sink your teeth into and say, okay, we can still rely on this table. Let's move to Toyota. These are the ones that are a killer. It's been about 4 years ago, but Toyota was the first manufacturer that just went to straight list on warranty. Straight list on warranty. And what you can see here, this is the one that you have to really be careful about. These manufacturers are starting to tweak some of their pricing. Here you can notice Toyota, 86.32% of their parts are under that traditional 40% margin. Only 12.85% is at 40. The kicker here is that if you go to the gross profit percentage, in other words, the yield of this 86.32%, it's still at 37.38%, but that's a couple of percent below the traditional 40%. They're just nibbling away at that 40% profit margin, and you can see that represented 55.52% of the total year sale. Now, the question here, as you look at this and thinking about getting retail on warranty sales, you would expect that, okay, retail would be a 40% margin, but if you're a Toyota dealer and you look at that and you're at about 37%, now you know why. Because you're selling it at suggested retail, but suggested retail, they're taking and nibbling a couple of percent away from you. Now, I put Subaru in here for a reason. You can see they're fairly traditional now with their 86.82% of their cars are at the 40% margin. And about 90% of the part number sales are at that. But 3 years ago, what they did in a new master tape in 2017 is they actually took, and when you look down at that 11.26% under the 40% margin, what they did, the percentage was about that, but what they took all their fast moving maintenance items, oil filters, air filters, brake pads, rotors, they made those a cost plus 40 or 28.5% margin. We had a dealer in the Philadelphia area, a Subaru store, that their gross profit went from 39% on customer pay to 32% literally in 30 days. They contacted us and asked us what we had done, what we had changed or tweaked, and why their margins were so low. This is when we started investigating this and found out nothing had changed. They sold all their maintenance items at suggested retail, and hence Subaru had just knocked down their retail, left the cost the same, and changed the profit margin. They've since changed that. Obviously, enough Subaru dealers must have caught it and complained about it, that at least they've righted the ship. So one of the things you have to do on a consistent basis, and I'm going to show you that here in a minute, one of the things you have to do when you're going through this is you continually have to look at, maybe once or twice a year, what your profit margins would be with your manufacturer. The last one is a real kicker, BMW. This is a killer. I actually was called into a dealership that we were working with because their profit margins had dropped below 30% on customer pay. And of course, the dealer was not happy, thought it was some type of matrixing we had implemented, which we don't implement matrices. We just install them, make suggestions, but we're an inventory control company. But at this particular point, talking with this specific dealer was very upset because their customer pay gross profit margins over about a 90-day period had dwindled below 30%. And what we discovered here with BMW, you can see almost 71% of their part number population is under 40%. The real kicker is to go to the gross profit percent yield, and you see it's at 31.69%. Remember Toyota, theirs was at 37.38%, only a couple of percent below that 40% margin. Here, BMW, 71% of their part number population is 8.5% lower than the 40% margin. And then you look at the percent by year sale, 90.76% of all their year sale parts came out of these under 40% parts. Hence why this dealer, their customer pay margin dropped like a rock. BMW had been changing the pricing. One of the things I want to do here very quickly is just make you understand what you're dealing with now with these stock replenishment programs. You basically have two completely different inventories you're dealing with. What's guaranteed, what's not guaranteed. In this sample slide here, we're breaking down the inventory on what's guaranteed versus what's not guaranteed. You really have to understand this because it's not the upper section that you're as concerned with, except that utopia would be to have 100% of your inventory guaranteed. And believe me, friends, listening to this, nobody's ever going to hit that. But you'd like to have 50 to 60% of your inventory guaranteed. In this particular case, looking at this dealership, only 33% of their inventory is guaranteed, 66% is not guaranteed. This is why obsolescence is growing at the dealership level, is because you don't earn return allowance on all your purchases, only on your non-purchases, and it's a very small percentage of your incentives. So looking at this, the first thing you really need to do after you have identified what's going on within your inventory is you need to start separating your inventory management reports through stocking groups, sources, sort sources, whatever, depending on the DMS you're on. You need to break it down into what's guaranteed and what's not guaranteed, and be able to identify this very easily on your system. Now, all of this that I've discussed here in the last 10, 15 minutes, I can sum up. Quite honestly, what's going on in the industry, what's happening, what I've just showed you, why you have to separate out inventories, why you have to worry about what your manufacturer's up to. I can sum it up in 2 words very quickly. Warranty retail. Warranty retail. At least at this point, 40 out of 50 states have gone in and ratified that manufacturers should have to pay warranty retail. For years, the traditional was they paid cost plus 40 or a 28.5% gross profit margin. Well, now states, we see some dealerships getting cost plus 90 on warranty, cost plus 80 on warranty. So the good news is you're getting more of a profit margin on warranty retail. The bad news is your manufacturers have learned how to matrix you. And what they're doing in this particular point, if you think about warranty retail, it's really been a shell game. We've seen things like return allowance incentives, warranty labor time guides are all shrinking. The manufacturer is making the money back up through different areas. Hence, one of the areas, especially in the parts operation, is the lack of ability to maintain and get rid of obsolete inventory. So with that being said, and we could certainly spend more time going through this and drilling down, but for the purposes of this educational presentation, one of the slides that I'm going to bring up now, which just simply states that your manufacturers learned how to matrix you, is a roadmap for you to actually go in and figure out if your manufacturer is indeed matrixing you, very much like Toyota, very smallly, in a very small margin, a couple of percent, or quite a bit of percent like BMW. Again, here's your roadmap. It's quite simple. What you do is you pull a pad, just pull everything you have on your DMS system, regardless of on hand or whatever. Make sure to include the part number, the cost, the list, and the 12-month demand. You can import this into an Excel spreadsheet. And then one of the things you'll need to do, and here's the roadmap, is create a column to subtract list from cost. Then you're going to want to take the difference between list and cost and divide it back into list to get a profit margin. And again, I give you the Excel formula there in option number 4 that you would want to do, dividing D3 into B3 times 100, comma 2. That'll give you a percentage. Now you can, once you have that, you can sort your Excel spreadsheet by just sending gross profit and do breaks at what's above 40%, what's at 40%, and what's below 40%. Again, listening to me, don't take my word for it. I only listed a sampling of 5 manufacturers. There's a lot more out there that you can do. Run this report and see what they're doing to you. This is critical for maintaining grosses, worrying about accruing dollars to get rid of some of the obsolete inventory, and more importantly, helping you to maintain profitability and a good return on your investment. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us by phone or by contact information. Thanks for your time today. We'll do another educational process here in a couple of weeks. Take care. Good selling. Have a good day.